Okay, let's get this meeting started. I don't see an agenda, so I'm not going to follow one. But I think our purpose here today, which remind me for clarity, because we started talking about this because we had a new position that needed, you know, a base rate of some kind. I've got some questions about the presentation that we've looked at, but let's talk about that when we get there. So that was my initial understanding, but it seems like, are we doing the whole compensation meeting at this point? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we're going to go through all these positions. Typically, Kathleen has led us through that. And so I'm interested to see what you're thinking about the materials that you presented. And then we do have some folks here for resource if we have questions. And, we'll just kind of do it all together here today. So, Kathleen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So we do have a sort of a general agenda. First is the introduction and overview of the elected officials compensation board committee and the requirements. I mean, if we can do introductions if we'd like, or should we go ahead and do that? Sure, start. I'll go ahead and start. Kathleen Hinman, I'm the Human Resources Director here at Deschutes County.
I'm Terry Lorenz, the HR Analyst here at Deschutes County.
Judy Trigo, Deschutes County Budget Committee.
I'm Bruce Barrett, citizen member of Deschutes County Budget Committee.
Nick Levi, County Administrator.
Robert Tintel, Chief Financial Officer.
Whitney Hale, Deputy County Administrator.
Eric Crop, Deputy County Administrator.
And Jim Pfister, Budget Committee member, citizen member.
And then I'll just go over kind of quickly, second agenda item is the presentation review of the compensation packages. But I think just before we go into that, what I'd like to do is one of the documents that I provided is an overview of the elected officials compensation board. And it's kind of just a nice reminder of why we're here, what we're doing, and the purpose of the meeting. So the Deschutes County Elected Official Compensation Board, it's a member advisory board that's responsible to conduct the annual review of Deschutes County elected officials' salaries and to recommend an appropriate compensation package in accordance with ORS 204112, which is summarized in the materials below. But just to pull out a couple of things there, it's kind of the how we do it. And so in the ORS, it says that the County Compensation Board shall annually review the compensation paid to persons comparably employed by the state of Oregon, local public bodies, private businesses, labor market deemed appropriate by the board for each elective officer, shall take into account factors as the number of employees supervised, size of budget, administrative elective officer, duties, responsibilities of each of those elected officers, compensation paid to subordinates, and other appointed employees who serve in positions of comparable management responsibility, prepare and approve by majority vote a recommended compensation schedule for the elective officers and shall submit the recommended compensation schedule to the county governing body. So typically our practice has been that recommendation then goes to the budget committee and motions made during that time, which is when we were typically holding this meeting. We've now moved it up to give us a little bit more time to have the discussion. So the human resources, we have historically provided the board with an analysis report for review and consideration. The report uses the county's selected comparable counties, which include Clackamas, Lane, Jackson, and Marion. The report also includes compensation data for the elected officers, sort of a second in command. If there's a deputy or high level supervisor, and then also the county director positions as comparable. So that information is included in the packet that you have here. Just a couple of things to come into play because these we'll hear this as we move forward. The county's compensation strategy has been taken into consideration. This is what the county uses to determine compensation for the rest of the majority of our employees, and this was adopted by the board December of 2017. Compensation philosophy is that, and I'd like to read it. I think it's kind of an important piece. At Deschutes County, our employees enjoy a rewarding work culture that is proudly focused on providing innovative and comprehensive services to our community. Our goal is to attract, reward, and retain a talented and diverse workforce to deliver these services. We value our employees and recognize their commitment by providing them with a competitive compensation, benefits, and retirement package that is internally equitable and fiscally responsible to the citizens and taxpayers of Deschutes County. In administering our total compensation program, county remains committed to sound stewardship of public funds and recognize our responsibility to those we serve in a manner that supports long-term financial sustainability. So as I've mentioned, that the county has defined the competitive labor market and also sort of where we anchor our pay grades. So when we looked at what does it mean to be a competitive labor market, we looked at the average of our market and an additional 5%, which was intended to recognize our desire to attract and retain a high quality workforce in a high growth area with a high cost of living. That's an overview. The next, let's see. So we've got a lot of data. I think everyone, there's no shortage of spreadsheets in this presentation by any means. And just to maybe kind of go through that packet a little bit and what we have here. I think that to kind of go over the overview of how the meeting will go is that we'll review the comparable data that we provided here, answer any questions, have some conversation around each of the positions. And then we will, as we get further down, recognize that we are in a unique situation that the county hasn't been in for a long time, and where we now have a treasurer that is not our appointed CFO. So that is something that we will have to kind of really look at in a minute here. So the packet that we have, let's see, I've got in front of me the summary where we talk about the counties that we use and go over the population. The next page is a recommendation page. And one thing I want to point out on the recommendation page, and I don't think it was very clear, so I'm making it very clear, is that it is a recommendation of adjustments that are needed just to maintain that compensation philosophy or address any compression issues with a deputy or second in command. It does not take into account any consideration for a cost of living adjustment, right? The county is planning on a 4% cost of living adjustment in the proposed budget at this time, at least for non-reps and the unions that we have a confirmed contract with, right? So that is not taken into consideration on that first page. What I have just recently inserted into your packet is a second recommendation page that does take into account if the committee wants to consider a cost of living adjustment, either in addition to any adjustments needed for meeting the compensation philosophy or to address the any compression issues. And additionally, there are considerations to just apply COLA, to apply a COLA plus the adjustments, or I'm sure there's a variety of ways in which we can approach that. So I have now included both of those documents there.
How do we tell them apart?
Sure. So
I
page,
think I'm missing that one, but I can follow along from home.
that's true, sorry about that. Page 3 is the original recommendation. So it says the second column on there is the adjustment recommendation. And then the one that doesn't have the page number because we snuck it in is the one that includes the recommendation for the adjustment recommendation. And then the final column includes the impact if we were to add a COLA there. And I thought it might be kind of helpful to see the numbers, right? So if we took the existing current base salaries, add in that adjustment that is being recommended, and then if we add that cost of living on top of that, we do have some support here with Terry, so she can work on some numbers as we go if we want to look at how that works as we've done in the past. So those are the two documents that we have there. Any questions on that before we sort of dive in?
Thank you. Kathleen, I just want to address something that I hear about. And that is the comparables that we have, the 4 comparable counties that we have. I hear, be it from an elected official or from one of our 1,000+ represented employees. And I'm just going to put this out there because I think it's important for our budget, our compensation election board to hear it. Why aren't we looking at Washington County? Why aren't we just looking at the city of Bend because we're in the same housing market and our housing market is different from everybody else's? And I think it's helpful to address that, or that, why are we looking at that position? Because that position is so different from my position or this category of positions. And I don't know that those issues will come up today, but I hear about those regularly. And I think it's just helpful maybe if we just dive in to talk about that just a little bit more for the benefit of everybody. But we're not just selecting these for one reason or another, because and that we're looking at these, we're not selectively picking some positions from Washington County that may pay more, but we're not similarly, we're not just picking some positions from Jackson County that pay far less. I mean, this is a strategy, it's a philosophy, and this is just, this information is here to help inform the board with your decisions. This isn't scientific, this isn't that we shall do this, this is going to be for your decision. But I don't know if you have any other comments or thoughts on that, because I hear about it from entry-level employees to other elected officials across the county. So I think it'd be helpful just to maybe share a little bit more about our methodology and why we use the methodology that we do.
Sure, I'd be happy to comment on that. A couple of things. I think that in terms of why the county had selected these particular comparables for our market, there is, as we look at negotiations with our 6 unions, that's a lot, right? There are some requirements for us to, if we were to head into any type of arbitration or required to have an arbitrator look at our offerings compared to our union's offerings. There are guidelines in what that arbitrator would be looking for. They'd be looking for comparable counties that are essentially what they call 2 up or 2 down, and that's typically around population. When the county defined our compensation philosophy and strategy, we were in a high growth area. We were there's a lot of recommendations and considerations around, do we include private sector in this analysis? Do we look at someone like City of Bend? There were some others. Yamhill was another county that we looked at. Benton County was one that we looked at, and actually the board elected to remove that from this particular compensation review. So in looking at all of those, what we looked at are there's a couple of counties that just did it so different than us. It was very difficult to find comparable positions. So we really looked at maybe eliminating a county there. Cities are always nice because we live in the same area, we share the same labor market, and we share the same housing market typically. What can be difficult with that is there's a subset of positions at the county, subset of work that the county does that the city does not. And so we would have a subset of positions that would have a comparable, but not necessarily, right? So that was one of the reasons why we looked at sort of simplifying it and going with a particular set of counties. When we looked at Washington County, one of the big differences, one, it's a much larger county population-wise than we are. They have some different practices. For example, they don't include the 6% PERS contribution. So that is something that the employees bear. So in factoring that analysis, if you look just dollar to dollar, we really should be looking at removing from Washington County, a 6% reduction in that in their compensation, because it's something that the employee pays there, and wages would have been adjusted for that. So we didn't look at that one in particular. We felt that this was, if you look at the populations that we selected, Deschutes County is actually the smallest population. So we've actually gone 4 up to recognize the impact of the growth and where we're going. The other piece is that where we set and anchored that that compensation philosophy, right? Are we just at median, which would at average, which would be where, the average of all of our comparables, we wanted to be a little bit above average in our setting our compensation so that we could recognize things like the higher cost of living here. Higher cost of living also fluctuates can fluctuate pretty dramatically. We've seen it here. We're not really interested in reducing salaries if we were to see cost of living change. So we really want to make sure that it's something that's stable, that the county can rely on. I would say historically, this board has utilized the same comparable structure. As noted in the kind of opening of that, the overview of the ORS, the board can look at other comparable agencies. And that is a decision I think that the board can make.
Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that, because I wasn't necessarily thinking about like adding Washington County, but I was thinking that we would align more with Clackamas versus Lane, Marion, or Jackson, just because of the cost of living here. And really wanting to attract and retain those folks, and had some questions because there were some zeros on here. So I was glad to see the newest summary, and it might be something we want to look at in the future. I just don't think that we can compare with those other 3 counties. I think population probably isn't the only factor we should look at in the future. So it just seemed to me that it was low. Some of them had no recommendation for adjustment. So I know we'll go through all of that, but those were my concerns when I saw this.
And I hope that was clarifying in terms of why there were zeros there, because they weren't needed to meet those particular approaches. I do plan to have the conversation regarding COLA adjustment, cost of living adjustment specific with the board on how we would include it to address the folks, for instance, with the zeros.
I thought your explanation was good, by the way. I'm happy it went on that. And, I've, in different contexts, I've walked through different compensation philosophies on this, and you have to be as consistent as you can as you're looking at the whole organization. But the fact that, I think the thing that we all need to consider is that there are other factors that we can bring in beyond what's, directly presented here. And thank you, Kathleen, for pointing that out.
One other question, just for clarity, when you mentioned in your opening remarks that wants to make the decisions on the compensation, how does that move forward into the budget? What number do we get as when we look at the budget?
Meaning, for how does it move from this
Yeah, how does
board?
this decision get to the budget?
Yeah, so
Since the budget's already been pre-planned.
and that well, I guess that would be a good question maybe for our school
Robert?
director here. I mean, oftentimes I think historically it was happening during that budget week. And so
Yeah.
I'm sure there were some fun adjustments that were occurring to address those. I'm not sure if there are any assumptions that were made in the budget.
No, there weren't any assumptions built in with this in it. So anything, and Dan's here as well, correct me if I misstated. It's like, so you'll make a recommendation to the full budget committee and it'll get approved. So it'll be like a special request. We'll have to build it into the budget that's in there. And if it's within, say, an internal service fund, really that means the general fund would be paying for any difference in any of the funds that are have increase in costs.
Yeah, so part of my question had to do with that if we make a recommendation that it may affect the general fund. Yeah.
And we expect that.
Okay. All right, so should we proceed with the discussion? I'm going to ask, and maybe you can chime in, Judy and Jim, if we started with the biggest issue here that I think will take the longest discussion is treasurer. We start our discussion with treasurer.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yes.
So Kathleen,
Yes.
it looked like in the presentation, I may not have been smart enough to figure it out, that we were looking at a full position salary.
The last 3 pages of your paper presentation right now. If someone has it.
Karen, if you send it to me, I'll send it over to you. So when we pull the compensation, so similar justice of the peace is another one where it is a percentage of FTE of a full-time. So we always pull the full annual salary of as if it was a full-time equivalent, and then look at consideration of that, right? So and Jim, I understand that we're gonna get the materials for you, so thank you for following along. We
It's,
have,
I've pulled the stuff off the county site, so I think I'm just missing that one page that
Okay.
you
great.
didn't send.
I'll send the additional documents, anything that wasn't included in the package. Please.
So just a little bit, I think for the treasurer review, what I included in here is a little bit of background. So it has been some years since we've had 2 separate positions of an actual elected treasurer and a either financial director or CFO.
Was
Yeah.
there a point where there was 2 different or?
Mr. Gibbons.
Well, yeah, back in about 2001, 97, yeah, we had separate, and then when Marty came on,
Okay,
he came on just
pre-Marty.
and basically just started moving things over to Marty, and then the treasurer retired, and Marty was then appointed as treasurer, so, and since then it's been kind of the same way.
Okay. So in the packet that you have here, just a quick background of where we were, and I appreciate the history piece there. And actually, David Gibbons did a great audit, which really helped us kind of figure out what to do and how to do it, or at least helped inform that. So in, as you may remember, Bruce, I think you were the lone continuing member of the committee, but in January 1st, 2021, the Elected Officials Compensation Committee created order number 2020-005. And that authorized alternative compensation for Deschutes County Treasurer. And the reason that we did that was because we found ourselves in a situation where we had at least an appointed and someone would have to run again. And so a new opportunity for treasurer and could or could not be the CFO, sort of undetermined at that time. And so the board met and created an order that said, I'll just paraphrase it, if the treasurer is also the appointed CFO, there will be an annual compensation of $5,110 paid in equal installments. So it's an annual stipend at the time of $5,110. And there was, some consideration around that and this will be, I think, part of what we hear a little bit. When the CFO assumes the treasurer responsibilities or the treasurer, there is some delegation of those duties to staff within the finance department. And so I think that there's an expectation that it's not necessarily the CFO doing, especially at the CFO level, doing all of those treasurer activities. The order went on to say that providing that the treasurer is not appointed CFO, the annual compensation shall be 10% of the top step pay level for CFO position, which if we're to fast forward today, what is that? That is $17,293 annually. And that was determined because it was estimated that about 10% of the duties as it was determined at that time. We recently, the administration has met with treasurer and with CFO, and out of that, there was a roles and responsibilities document that was created that's in your treasurer, or that's in your packet, that identifies kind of, or outlines at least what treasurer will be responsible for. That was presented to the board and approved late April. So we have that. So staff reviewed as we move through this, I'll just talk about the staff went and reviewed treasurers at our comparables. For instance, Clackamas County Treasurer, Jackson County. I should point out, Clackamas County Treasurer is elected, so it's an elected one that has details in here, but that treasurer's office has 5 staff in addition to the treasurer. It's responsible for investment, banking management agreements, maintenance of 50 county and public trust accounts, participates in debt service payments and management. It also, the office reconciles county's bank accounts, handles tax distribution, the payment card program, and the PCI compliance program. And additionally, the treasurer is also the appointed internal audit director and manages the internal audit function fraud hotline. So it's a pretty big treasurer's office compared to what we've identified as roles and responsibilities here. Jackson County is appointed, so it is Jackson County is the finance director is appointed to also serve as the treasurer, so it's non-elected. And they have identified the treasurer role of that position to be the investment portfolio primarily. And then it just states that the treasurer duties are incorporated into the finance director. So it's really kind of hard to assess those two out. They've not done that exercise. They can really. Lane County is appointed and it is the financial services manager. And so just to kind of give a little bit of structure, there is a director of operations at Lane County, and the financial services manager serves under that director, and they are the appointed treasurer, and those treasurer duties are also incorporated into the financial services manager and staff's duties. Marion County Treasurer is elected. They identify that role to receipt all revenues, maintain records for receipts, investment payment of county funds. It does indicate that they oversee the payment card processing policy and they are the investment manager for Marion County. In July of 2022, the treasurer's office was consolidated and actually into the finance department. So a little bit of a different structure there, and we've not really seen much of the outcome of that yet, what that means, but it does still identify treasurer's office. It is just sort of budgetarily and organizationally incorporated into the finance department. The Deschutes County Treasurer responsibilities, what Deschutes County has determined is kind of, it's this page here, and this is a 1 and a 2 on it. It's identified, and just a quick summary here, we've determined that they are responsible for the investment portfolio, and the committee responsible for property tax distribution. We do have a tax collector office. And then the distribution of those property taxes is handled by the treasurer. Responsible for reviewing proposed legislation and attending meetings as required with that. Responsible for general banking services relationships, details there, and responsible for the county's PCI compliance program. So that would be part of that. There's some payment card industry or payment card work associated with that. And then there's some responsibility for community engagement as well. Kind of looking at the different positions there. So HR staff used our standard process and applied the county's compensation philosophy in establishing the recommended full-time equivalent. That's how we came up with the data on page 11, which is the treasurer's review, salary review. And staff reviewed similar positions there and came up with the positions you see here and applied the market average plus 5% to reach county's compensation philosophy. And again, this is at a full-time equivalent. County staff reviewed the responsibilities and expect the new role to regularly be about 20 to 30% of full-time staff. The treasurer currently reports spending about 4 hours per day, so 50% on the role, including getting up to speed, participating in community events, etc. So given this review, we have before you a salary schedule that goes anywhere from 20 to 50% that we've put in the packet here. Okay.
Your recommendation is at 20%?
We have it listed at 20 right now. That was where administration, when we got together and looked at everything, we felt that that was pretty solid We recognize that currently treasurer's spending a little bit more time than that on that, whether or not that's, just getting up to speed, community engagement, and whether or not the committee wants to recognize that, I think would be something that is up for discussion. So the page 11 identifies the positions, the annual salary that is reported, and I'll say that this is as of May 1, so it doesn't include any consideration for what they're giving as a cost of living, correct?
That's this page.
Yeah. And we do happen to know that the average cost of living between all of these that's being applied this year is 4%, which is the county's non-represented, which would be applied to like internally for department heads, should it be approved by the budget committee and board.
Do you have something showing department head? I think you
We
do.
do.
Yeah.
So that is page 2.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so where are you recommending this falls? Director?
This does not fall, the current, when we pulled out the annual salary and applied the county's philosophy, this falls at 146,000, which would be, it falls within, the directors have 2 ranges, and it falls about midway between the first range and probably in the top of the first third of the second range for directors.
So the number you've used to do this calculation, how does that compare with the with this chart?
So
How do I compare those two numbers? So if I'm looking at the director's pay for reference, and I see some hourly numbers here that interprets that.
they probably don't go directly. So
Okay.
what you have here on the recommendation for the salary schedule is if it were a full-time equivalent, we have again, using the county's existing compensation philosophy, we have pegged that at 146,000 annually.
Okay.
And what you have here is 20% of that, 25% of that, 30, 35, et
Yeah,
cetera.
the 146.
Exactly, right? So the 146, for instance, if you're looking then at page 2, if we look at grade N 426, that director, you can see the mid is at 147. And
Yes,
so that's why I say it's pretty close to about the mid-range of that grade. And then if we were to look at the next grade, N 427, mid is 154 and the minimum's 133.
so could we do a quick calculation on what would be the mid for the 154? What would be an annual salary for that? That's the 154?
Yeah.
So what would it be? I'm answering my question as I'm looking.
Okay, good.
All right. Any thoughts of where we start, Judy or Jim?
Well, if the treasurer, the county staff review the responsibilities and expect a new role at 20 to 30% of full-time staff, and the treasurer's reporting currently spending 50% for 4 hours a day. I don't know that I'm comfortable paying at 20, which would be the recommendation, correct? If he's spending 50, is that role going to be reduced over time? Is it, I just can't see it going lower than that. Maybe I'm incorrect. I don't know if the treasurer's
Could we ask
here to
Bill
answer that
what
question.
your thinking is going forward?
It's the discretion of the chair. But you might want to.
If you want to weigh in.
I know it's a
Go ahead.
little bit awkward,
just be a
but
bit-
I
Sonia.
just want to know,
On the mic.
is this,
Give us your best guess
Yeah.
on what you know now. We'll have to make the ultimate decision.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity here. In my mind, I think there's two schools of thought here. Number one, it shouldn't be necessarily a focus on hours per day. It should be a focus on responsibility of the position. This is, it's a big scale position. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a responsibility for managing, protecting, preserving a $300 million investment portfolio. There's a lot of risk out there right now, and this is not a temporary hourly position. And I would definitely want to persuade the compensation committee to not adopt that kind of focus. This is, again, this big scale position, and I really believe that that should be the focus. It's also the kind of job that you don't just check in and check out and then not think about it.
Yeah, good.
When you're not here at the office, there's a lot going on out there right now. And again, my recommendation would be to not focus on assigning a particular percentage to a full-time equivalency, but focus more on the responsibilities associated with the position.
That's a good point. I like that perspective. It helps me make a little better decision about the value of the, let's just say the hourly value. You know, it could be a little more now, a little less then, but overall, what time you do spend on it has a certain value.
Yeah, and
what is that value?
yeah, and I will remind the committee too that we recently went through the process of assigning responsibilities to the treasurer. There's a lot of collaboration that needs to take place now that we actually have a separate defined treasurer role within the finance department. And there'll be other duties that need to be assigned out as part of that process that we'll continue to work on with our existing CFO and staff. And so I think we're 4 months into this process right now, but we have not had a separate defined treasurer position for many years, and we do now. And so I don't necessarily blame the county. We're in the position that we're in right now because our current CFO is not eligible to run for treasurer. And so that's the position we're in. It's not as efficient as it could be otherwise, but that's the reality.
So if I may, Bill,
Sure, Jim.
you know, you ran for the position, and you ran for the position on, you know, on an assumed pay scale that was going to go in on that, and it was fairly low. You know, now we're talking about going higher, but given where you are, and I know this is kind of an unfair question, but given where you are, and given some of the discussions that you're hearing right in here, would you run again based on the load of work and that compensation that you're getting?
You want an honest answer, or do you want?
Which goes back.
I'm asking an honest question.
Yeah, and I appreciate the comment there, Jim. I think the perception that I had, and that you know, obviously we weren't able to fully define it, but it was a stipend based on a structure that no longer exists. That's not the reality of what we're faced with right now. And so I kind of view that as being somewhat immaterial to the discussion that we're in today. Stipend doesn't apply to an individual that holds that position outright that isn't performing additional duties and responsibilities assigned outside of their core responsibilities. So I assumed that there would be a discussion around that we would have to have a realistic discussion around what was appropriate for the position. Certainly, I had an understanding of the position that the county was in, that we did not have a clearly defined role for that position that needed to be built out. And it's been a process that has evolved over time to the point where we are today. So I don't know. I don't know if I really answered your question there, Jim, but
I got an idea. I mean, there are other positions in the county, or at least there are other positions that I'm familiar with in local government where, you know, you hire somebody on an assumed workload and assumed set of responsibilities, and then find out that that isn't true and have to make an adjustment. And, you know, we've just got to try and figure out what's the fair and right way to do that.
Yeah, I think if, as a completely separate position, trying to entice an individual to run for that position under the former pay scale, I don't think that's realistic. I mean, why, just, again, looking at responsibility and requirements of the position versus compensation. There's, in my mind, a significant disconnect there.
So let me take a stab at it. I think with the level of expectation we have, or at least the responsibility that's there, and we do have a person now that I think can meet the obligation. We may not in the future, and we'll have to deal with that at that point. But given the quality of person that we have in place, the amount of expectation we have of them, and not try to pick out and say, well, how many hours should you be spending? Let's just give some value to it. Given the numbers and the charts that I see here, I'm going to peg it at this mid-level director position of 154,764 and at a 50% level.
Plus the 4% COLA, or just at last year's?
I think that includes.
This reflects the 4%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, it does. Oh, okay.
Well, I agree with Bruce. And you have somebody overseeing a $300 million investment portfolio, and given the work level, I don't see it being at 20 or 30% even.
Yeah, I would also remind the compensation committee that, you know, the structure that we have in place, we don't pay management fees to an outside investment firm. So we're not incurring that monthly cost. And I know there's other counties in the state of Oregon that have a different investment philosophy, but this is the responsibility lies within the treasurer's office and secondarily with the CFO to make those investment decisions on behalf of the county. And so again, focusing on scope of the position.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Were you aiming at the mid at 154?
Yes, correct.
And the entire 154, was there?
I think it was 50%, 70.
73, 60.
Yes,
Okay,
the
so
50
at
the
50%.
level. Yeah.
73,
77.
77. Oh, because of the
That
COLA.
year, Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I did 154. I just did 50% of 154, 764.
And what's that one, 4%?
No, that's including, so this table includes the 4%. So we would have
Thank
that.
you. You did say
Mhm.
that. Thank you.
So that puts it at 77,382. So 77,382, I think, is about
Yes,
what
yes.
you're is where you are at that. I think to yes is the short answer, right? Rather than pontificating. I think that's probably a fair thing. And what we probably need is a more thorough analysis long term of once the treasurer goes steady state, whether the 50% is appropriate or too high or too low or otherwise. But I think that's a worthwhile way to start this year.
I just want to point out, and I don't think I would be doing my job if I didn't, so I'm going to say it, that would put the Deschutes County Treasurer at above every one of our comparables for elected treasurer.
The 154.7, you mean?
Yes, yeah,
You're looking at the other county comparables.
correct.
But without the 50% adjustment.
No, not without the 50%.
Okay,
Yeah, so when we're looking at, if we're going to annualize it, right, to the 154, right? And so And I know, I think it's the HR in me that's very difficult to move away from sort of percent FTEs and hourly rates, right? But in looking at that, that annualized piece, that does put us higher than Clackamas, which oversees an office and the internal audit function, as well as Jackson Lane and Marion. But recognizing that the recommendation is 50% of that. And whether or not, I think the question is, does that, the reduction to the 50% recognize that the comparison to those other ones? And are we comfortable with that analysis, just as we move into discussing the rest of the elected officials' compensation?
Well, and to give you the figures, it's a lot, it would put us at a full-time equivalent using the 154, 11% over average, and then 6% of over plus 5%.
Not terribly high, but
So you're getting the numbers from like this list here under treasurer.
Yeah, and comparing the,
page 11.
yes.
Jim, were you saying something? I'm sorry. I think I cut
And,
you off.
and I just want to make sure I'm reading the table right, because when we're looking at the annual salary on the comps, that's annual salary as of fiscal 23, correct?
Correct, right.
You're looking at
All
the
right.
salary category.
Yeah, so if I'm looking at annual salary, so that, so just, for comparisons, if you do the 4% COLA, that puts Clackamas, for instance, at 145 and change. That's going to put Jackson well over 154. So I mean, there is, we're comparing what we want to do this year to what they were doing last
Right,
year. So I
right,
just want to make sure we're apples to apples here.
Yeah.
So, but if the answer is, oh, we're sitting a little above, I think that what that says is that's valuing the contribution and the quality of the people that, well, the quality of the person that we have and the quality of people that we are seeking to go fill this position if the CFO is not able to do it.
Well, if you take somebody like treasurer non-elected here, is that Jackson? Yeah, Jackson.
So they're the
How do we-
finance.
How do we compare to that?
Well, they're currently at 152. Is that what?
Yeah, I mean, you gave me some numbers, 11% or.
Oh, how do we compare it directly to just that?
But then if that goes up 4%.
Yeah, I'd have to.
It'd be Jackson at the 4% COLA is 158, 281, 34.
Yeah, just put
Think
these numbers
that-
in.
Jackson, the finance director there, likely oversees an entire department, right? And a lot of other functions and services. So, are we confident that that's a good comparable to link to?
Yeah.
I'm gonna say I don't have a problem with it as proposed at 50% of mid-grade or midpoint.
I realize we probably should have addressed this at the beginning. Should we take a motion after each one, or do it in totality at the end?
Let's do a motion after each one. just
Motion
so
after
it's
each one,
consistent.
okay. It's one of those pieces to,
Procedural.
yeah,
Because then it's clear we don't. Yeah.
right.
What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little hard to compare this number, and you explained that early on, because these people have benefits and they've got a lot of other things mixed into their package. We have a hybrid scenario. So it's really hard to compare those numbers. I don't think it holds, well, it'll probably have some influence on other elected officials in our conversation there, but I don't think it compares to other department heads directly. I don't think we're jeopardizing ourselves there.
And just to be clear that the elected treasurer position is eligible for health insurance benefits, so, and
Different.
deferred comp and PERS.
PERS as well.
Mhm.
Look at the guy. Bert's gonna help him.
Yeah.
They're coming from the private sector.
So the
Watching the market
motion, do you want
every
the
day.
amount at 50% or just the motion saying at 50%?
I think at 50%.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
50% of mid.
And it'd be good to include the dollar amount.
Oh, you want the dollar?
Yeah.
I think it's. makes
What's
it
the
more
final
clear.
dollar?
Maybe that's the 50% of the one. Right.
So midpoint of the 154,764 at 50% is 77,382.
So I move approval of the treasurer's position at 50% at 77,382.
I'll second that. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, now I suggest we just start at the top of the list. And that would be assessor.
It's a
So
lot of order. So
I
page,
know I got out of order.
I know.
I'm lost.
So page
Yeah.
5 is the more in-depth review of the assessor position. So in looking at the assessor, we looked at both Clackamas, or all Clackamas, Jackson Lane, Marion, and we looked at applying the county's compensation philosophy, as well as then the next piece, which is ensuring that there's at least a minimum of 5% above the deputy in this instance. And so in doing that, we recommend that there's an adjustment that's needed to even meet those two criteria, which is 5%, right? And that doesn't include a cost of living. So I think there's two ways to go about this. Some of our comparable agencies approach it with, if the cost of living is, for using this example, 4% and a 5% adjustments needed, it's just the 5% provided. However, to address compression, we may want to look at the adjustment that's needed to meet both the two factors of the compensation philosophy and address the second in command, as well as the fact that all of our comparables are going to have a cost of living adjustment as well. So the 5% just does not include the recommendation for a cost of living as well.
So you're talking about the 5% spread,
So on,
compression spread.
correct, so there's the compression spread is one of the factors, and then the other factor is how do we compare to these comparables that we've identified, right? So if we want to meet that compensation philosophy, which is 5% above average, and make sure that we have a 5% spread above the deputy, the assessor's annual salary, base salary would need just a 5% adjustment to meet those two factors. Doesn't take into account cost of living, so the second piece would be to consider cost of living on top of, in lieu of, that would be the discussion.
So tell me where the 5% philosophy came from. Did we come up with that as a group, or where?
There was, yep, so historically, the board recommended that, I think there's in minutes prior, that we maintain a 5% above deputy.
Okay.
That was a board decision, so is up for discussion as well.
That's a pretty standard governmental measure, or at least that, you know, in some of the other instances that I've operated as well.
5% would address the deputy director. Sure.
Correct.
And then 4% COLA. So that would be 9%. Whether to do that.
Well, I mean, it's even if it's an appropriate level, I mean, everything's on the table. You know, we haven't thrown in the idea of what generally in the community, but I don't have that information, so that's a little hard to bring in.
And again, just let me make sure I'm reading this properly. So I'm looking at page 5 and I'm looking at the deputy director assessor. So the proposed fiscal year 24 total pay is total pay is 162,319. The annual salary is 148,811.
Yeah, that's for last year, and then one more line, the FY 24 is annual salary 154,764.
Oh, there we are. So 154,764 at a 5% above is what you're talking
Right,
about.
that will, yeah, that's proposed for July.
Another item for discussion, we do have Jackson in here. I read just recently a concern they had about their assessor, and they reduced his annual salary by a certain amount. So this may be a little low. He had some errors and they penalized him. So that may change the average.
Well, I think it's, if you factor this in, I wasn't here when that all was done, I don't believe, but I don't know if you're addressing the factor of the deputy director at 5% and then say, okay, in lieu of COLA. Okay. It's not fair.
Yeah. So,
I think you need to look at in the very least, if you want the 5%, you need to be looking at the deputy director base pay at 154,764, and 5% above that is base is 162,502, if I did my math right. Or if my calculator did its math right. Plus the additions that goes beyond that. So that just maintains your 5% range.
So on the sheet you don't have, Jim, which is really helpful.
I actually do have it now.
But if we look at the recommendations where we say the 5% adjustment, and there's a couple of columns over that has the numbers, right? So current base salary is 155, 159. If we just applied that 5% adjustment and didn't think of COLA, which is, again, I think that there's some prior history there, not necessarily what we're recommending, but we're showing both options. It shows that, and then that third column, that final column, is if we were to address that adjustment needed of 5% and add the 4% on, so seeing that 9, would put base at 169,433.63.
Yeah, give me like 3 or 4 years. That's I get where you are now. So yeah, it puts it at 173. So that keeps you well above the
It would then place us 9% above the deputy. So the 5% adjustment, then plus the COLA, 9% above the deputy's FY 24 rate.
Is that the right way to say that? Because they're getting COLA as well.
That includes their
Assuming they're
COLA.
COLA.
It includes longevity changes, it
So
includes,
so there's an additional 4%?
To,
The 5% differential plus 4%.
correct.
plus 4% COLA.
But the deputy's getting COLA.
And that's factored in
That's
here. So
factored in.
that might be a little confusing, is because the numbers up here aren't factored because we didn't know what they were at the time, but we do know what we were proposing for non-rep. So that does include the 4% COLA for the deputy. So if the committee the board was to adopt the the consideration for COLA as well, the base salary for assessor would be the 169,433. And base salary of the deputy would be 154,764.
Well, it's almost 10% above. That's a pretty good measure. It's a fair raise in line with what we were assuming with what we're assuming everything else goes. I'm fine with that. The 169,433.63 base.
So can we move approval of the 169, 443.63?
If you have a motion. Yeah.
That's a motion.
Yeah.
If that was a motion, I'll second it.
Okay.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion is approved.
Okay. Assessor. Clerk. Oh, I'm assuming, sorry, Chair.
We find a clerk.
Now,
On the back of the assessor.
Yeah.
Oh, good, yeah, thank you.
Saving paper, just turn it over.
Oh, thank you. So I was concerned when I saw the clerk too,
Yes,
at
yeah.
0, so with no adjustment to maintain, I just thought with election integrity and everything that's happening in the clerk's office.
Absolutely.
I know we're gonna talk about it, but when I saw that 0, I was, yeah, concerned.
When we looked at the comparable clerk positions, and we looked at, remember, so those two factors, look at the comparable positions. Are we meeting our compensation philosophy of being at least 5% above? Yes. Are we at least 5% above the second in command? Yes. And so that resulted in the 0. If we were to apply then the 4% COLA to the clerk, that would be that second line there where we see the base rate would be 133,638.96 on the recommendation sheet.
Okay.
This one here.
So in,
Thank you. Yes, you can.
It's not even backside, it's leave it out. You want this one? I have
there
plenty.
we are.
No worries, just keep that one.
But
I have
find it, we'll be on
lots.
to the next, we'll be on to the commissioner.
So it's interesting. I mean, you know, if you look way back historically, we did a couple of strong adjustments on the clerk side comparatively to the rest. But otherwise, we've generally not raised the clerk as much. Is that a reflection of just the? Is that I mean, and I understand why from the base salary logic, but in general, the clerk and the clerk is the only full-time person that we're generally under raising in comparison to assessor, commissioners, DA, the rest, sheriff. Is that just because nobody else has been pushing it up, or is there something I'm missing about the clerk position otherwise? It could just be because the staff doesn't get paid that much.
I would say it's likely due to the comparables, given kind of the way in which this committee approached it. I think in years and years past, we really primarily looked at the comparables and adjusted as necessary. I don't think it is, in fact, I mean, I would be very clear to say it is in no way reflective of the current clerk or prior clerk's performance and what they oversee. I think a couple of things that are sort of interesting about our clerk's office is the fact that they have the archives, right, the historical components that some of the other clerk's offices don't have. So that's one, I think that's a little bit different as we look at the comparisons.
The only other thing I'm just going to, I need to jump in and just say, elections have changed dramatically in the last few years. And we just talked about the value of the position to oversee $300 million. Well, the integrity of our elections is absolutely paramount to everything we do. And our clerk does a phenomenal job, but just the clerks overall, I'm always surprised at just how low they are paid compared to other department heads, compared to the expectations and demands of what they experience now. Now, do I have a different recommendation? I don't know what it would be, but I just, it's a different position than it used to be in terms of what how they experience and how they manage election and spending in a growing county. There's a lot of demands and challenges. I'll just
I
leave
mean,
it at that.
Yeah, if you look at your director pay grades, I'm trying to flip back between all the tables. And by the way, thank you for letting me geek out on all these tables, Kathleen. I mean, add double it next time so that I have more fun. Basically what you're saying is the clerk is kind of an entry level, director, community development, community justice in that area, and entry level, not even midpoint at that point. Do we value the elected position like that, or do we value the elected position higher than that? I ask philosophically. Bruce, Judy, what do you think?
I value it more than,
Well, I mean, it's hard to justify looking at the comps, but if you want to go back and see what other director pay is, that may be a guiding light.
Yeah, like I said, we're basically paying them at
What's
at
the
an
hourly?
entry level,
What's the hourly on that?
64, 65.
Kind of a mid-range director pay is around 65. Depending on what step they're on, in, 65 to 75.
We have the two grades, right? So we have the first grade, which is the N426, we call it N427. And currently, so these are adjusted for cost of living. So if we're gonna take the clerk and adjust current wages for cost of living, that would, at the 4%, that would be 133,638, which would put them probably somewhere between minimum and mid of the first range, and just on the beginning of the second range. So looking at our comparables, Director 911, Director of Facilities, Fair and Expo Solid Waste, in that first group, and then the rest listed there. Probably step two.
Step 2 or 3.
Yeah, and that was the point I was trying to make. I mean, effectively, what you're saying is I'm putting them at the low end of the pay scale of a director. Certainly below the midpoint pay scale of any director otherwise in the county. And so while I understand that, I guess to be more definitive, while I understand that the comparables don't necessarily make the fit, I think the county comparables, very specifically in this case, probably make a case for a higher number to me.
well, you asked me, I have thoughts on it. I mean, I would have a recommendation to the 4% COLA and then add 2%, making a 6%. And I do that with some hesitation to pull a number out of a hat, but I mean, I think it's a good start for the budget committee to consider to start with. Likes to start.
So where would that put it? For people
So-
who are for people who have a spreadsheet as opposed to me trying to type it on the calendar.
6% with the one.
So if you just did a 6%, which would be inclusive of the 4% COLA, there would be 136,208.94.
What does that do for us on an hourly basis?
$68.
Yeah,
65,
66, 65.
65.49, almost 66, you're right.
It seems like we're still on the low end.
About 3.
Yeah,
If
but-
you did a 6% adjustment and then 4%
Yeah, I
COLA,
think-
it's 141,657. So where they would go.
That puts it just about 68, right?
So that would be 10%.
Yep, 68.
That
Yeah,
makes more
basically
sense.
10%. We just, our practice is to add the percentage to the base and then add the COLA.
So that makes sense to me.
So total,
Yeah, it's a total of 10.
and what would that number be?
If it was a total of 10, it's 141, 348, so a little bit less. It's actually an advantage to, yeah.
Because we're gonna adopt just numbers.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I think it's moving the needle in the right direction to me, if we wanted to go with that.
Okay, let's do it.
So 10%.
Flat 10%.
So can you do a motion on that?
I want to make sure I get my number right. So the clerk position, I move 141, 348. If that is indeed 10%. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Give or take a few rounds.
Give or take around the error.
Eunice likes to.
141, 348. You can motion, yeah.
So I move approval of 141, 348 for the clerk's position.
I will second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion is approved.
Yeah. Work is done. Okay, commissioners. Page 7. Breakout.
Found the other. Last year we did 6%, did we, last year? The recommendation this year 10. I thought I remember reading that somewhere.
So it looks like last year's,
That's 5.5.
5.5.
Yeah, last year was 5.5.
Okay,
And this year, so it shows that the commissioners were under the compensation philosophy, so under that market component there, and needed an 8% adjustment just to meet that. So the question, right, again, 8% plus COLA, which is currently 4%. And that is on the summary sheet. So if we were to just do the 8%, it would be 123,335. If we're to do the 8% plus the COLA, 125,149.
so the 12%.
Yep.
I'm in favor of the 12%.
I'll support that.
I'm fine with it.
So 8% adjustment with the 4% on top.
Yes.
So that one there.
Yeah.
So the 125, is that what we're,
So it's 125,
149,
49,
90.
19. So I move approval of the county commissioners at 125, 149, 19, 12%.
Second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion is approved.
District attorney.
That's okay.
We are rolling.
We're rocking it now.
It's, if we just turn it over. So,
If you talk to anyone in law enforcement, what they'll tell you is pay this district attorney as much as he wants.
He's sitting right here.
he's in the room. Good. Glad he heard that. So just a reminder on how the district attorney's compensation works. There is a state salary and county's may elect to provide a stipend. Historically, the county has elected to provide a stipend. So when we are talking about a 30% increase recommendation, it's just on the county stipend, since we have no influence over what the state pays. So we are just talking about the portion that the county provides as the stipend for the district attorney, which is in addition to that state salary. A little bit of information, go ahead.
So the county stipend right now is at 46,040. So
Yes.
am I reading that correctly? Okay, sorry,
Yes.
go ahead then.
So one thing that's sort of interesting is that this number jumped out at me this year. And in conversations with the other counties, one of the things that occurred is Lane County and Marion County recently completed a compensation study for their district attorney's office, which sort of bumped some salaries up. And that was the result. If we look at like last year's, for instance, Lane and Marion's county stipend was a bit lower, quite a bit lower, in fact. So it's really that change in their compensation that is driving this, the need for this recommendation. So the 30% adjustment is just to the county stipend, to that 46,040. We did, however, apparently the recommendation put the total compensation in terms of the state salary plus the county stipend. And so if we were to look at that 30% adjustment plus, well, just the 30% adjustment on the county stipend, the total salary would be 260,670, did I get that right?
Yeah.
And if we were to also add the 4% with that, it would be 271,097.
Yeah.
Current base salary is at 200,000.
So
To clarify that, the 30% on the county's stipend would be 59,852. If you added COLA on top of that, the county stipend would be 62,246.08.
So how does 154 and 62 equal 271?
You do, because your formula on the recommendation. Just realizing that's too much. Yeah. We
But
have
I
an
use
error,
base-
we
I
have an
use
error
base
in our
salary.
spreadsheet, so we're gonna go back and redo this one,
Okay.
although
Okay,
worth every penny.
Yes, the 271 is not, I added. I didn't carry over, but I can tell you, I have it on mine.
should be like 215.
I will. And then, so total salary, 30% adjustment and a 4% COLA, total salary would come to 216,722.08
That sounds about.
for base.
And the county's portion is 62,746.
The county portion would be 62,246.08.
4608.
And that would include the 30% adjustment and then the 4% COLA.
Tell me what that total pay number is again.
216,722.08. For the base salary, state and county. Total pay, which was hers and everything else, is like 227. But base would be 216,722.08.
I think we should focus on the stipend.
Yeah, the
piece, just in
stipend.
case the state makes any adjustments, because we can't commit. That would be committing the county to making up that difference, which could be an option, but I think if we make, I would advise the court to make a recommendation on the county stipend portion, so.
62,246.08.
So if there's no objections with the other budget committee members or any more questions, I would move approval of the 30 plus the 4% COLA at 62,246.08 for the district attorney's office.
I will second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved.
Okay. Next I have the sheriff.
Can you give me a minute? to find the
Absolutely.
Okay.
Page 9.
I think it would be easier the less pages I have, but it is.
A staple might have made it easier too. I
Thank you.
think. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we
Okay.
debated.
Process
Stapler,
Found it.
or do you want to shuffle around?
Okay, so I think you all know the process, Sheriff. We looked at those comparables of Clackamas, Jackson, Lane, Marion, looked at the county's compensation philosophy, and then also the captain, that position, and a 3% adjustment was recommended to meet those those components, and that results in 190,589. If we were to add a COLA into that, 198,212.71.
Sorry.
So remind, do you know off the top of your hand, what's the CBA adjustment for the sheriff's office this year? I thought it was 5.
They're at 4%.
They're at 4% this year. Okay. Okay, I thought they were 557. Okay, I'll trust you. I know Bend was 777.
They share the same language as many of our other unions, which is a factor of CPIU with a floor of 1 and a ceiling of 4.
Okay,
The 3% would take it to 207, 450. Am I reading this correctly?
No. But that's okay. So the recommendation sheet for the sheriff, if his current base is at 185, adding in the 3% would take him to 195.89. 14. And then to add cost of living on top of that, 198,212.71.
Okay, so I will make a comment, because I know we're defining our competitive market based on these counties. And in this particular case, I'm thinking about, I did a little research on, and I know it's not, recognize that it is not in our comparable market, but you look at attracting and retaining. One of the things I found was comparing to the Bend, and I know Nick brought this up earlier, that people say, well, how come we don't compare to our own market? The police chief, I believe, was at 223,945 for base. And then they have an employee incentive pay, the EPP, which takes it up, possibly to 245, 440. And the deputy police chief with EPP maximum is 229,840. Possible there. And so I don't know that I have a specific recommendation on an amount, but I did want to bring that up because part of what we use is to attract and retain those positions. And I don't know that that is comparable to Lane, Marion, or Jackson. I think we are more aligned with Clackamas, which in this case is 235,965. So that would be my comment on it, and I would just defer to the other budget committee members.
well, so more to the point, to me, a captain in Bend currently makes about 195. I don't remember the exact number. And that's before the CBA increase for fiscal year 24. So effectively in a couple of years, we're going to have a election for a sheriff and a police captain in Bend PD, of which there are several good ones, might look at that and go, I'm gonna take a pay cut and I get to deal with the public. Why would I ever run for that position? So I think we're actually, my concern is we're disincentivizing good local people to potentially run for a sheriff because we're running a little low.
I also think we're running a little low. I'm running a jail and a search and rescue and I don't know all they do. I mean, it's,
Don't forget having to deal with the public.
oh, yeah.
Well, if we did the 75th percentile on this sheet, does that get us there? Just trying to decide what number we
Jim.
use.
202, 179.
I like your calculator. Better than mine.
We look at the salary survey, there's 75th percentile.
That's the 230, 138.
Yeah, well, yeah, total pay.
It's better than 198.
I mean, effectively, what you're proposing is the 202,914.
Yeah,
Sorry,
just-
couldn't hear you, Jim.
I said what Bruce is proposing is the 202,914. And what does that do?
Got it. I see what you're saying now. Thank you.
Now I'm trying to do the work. I know we don't have an under sheriff, but if there was an under sheriff, what would the, because is that under sheriff, the 426, is that this year's or is that with the 4% COLA?
Yeah.
It does include the 4%.
Actually,
So it's,
We're confirming, yeah. Oh, actually, here,
It doesn't, yeah, so oh,
Yeah,
it does, 127, 170, yeah, because the 426 is the same as our lower level,
Our first level.
first
director.
level, yes.
so at 202,914, that over the max, which I realize takes a couple years to get to because of various steps. That's 18% above the under sheriff. So you've got a fair amount of distance between the two.
it puts us in range with the Clackamas.
I'm okay on 202,914. I mean, no statement one way or another. I would like to see our sheriff's position long-term be competitive to try and continue to attract really good talent to run for that office. So I'm good on the 202,914.
So I would move approval of 202,914 for the sheriff's position.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved.
We're to the final one. Justice of the Peace, which is page 10.
This one is a hybrid situation.
It's so we do have it set at a 60% of full-time salary situation, yes, so. And what we have here. So what we have are Clackamas,
Zero.
Jackson, Lane, and Marion comparables. And one of the things that has been made comment in the past is that requirements for a justice of the peace to be an attorney, first off, that's not a statutory requirement, but is a requirement that both, or that Deschutes County, Clackamas, and Marion County holds. So it's a decent comparable in terms of those positions. We currently have, again, that we're talking at that full-time equivalency piece, right? So 129,563 is current annual salary.
Here we are.
And if we were to add, so in looking at our pieces, we're not making a recommendation, an adjustment to the salary based on any second in command or market, but to apply the cost of living there would result in, so 4% increase would result in 134,745.52 annually. And then it has been set at a 60% for the justice of the peace.
So the recommendation is the 4% COLA, 134,7552. Me too. So I would move approval for the justice of the peace at 4% with the COLA at 134,745.52.
He's part-time, so the 4% COLA, which is not his part-time salary. Just to clarify, it won't be the correct dollar.
Okay.
Yes, so it would be 134,745.52 FTE adjusted for workload. Did that work as a motion?
Yes, it did.
Then I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is approved.
So in terms of next steps, just in what staff will be summarize these, record or calculate the impact, have a recommended motion that will be brought to the budget committee meetings and later this month for us to for the budget committee to review and consider. Does that sound, is there any additional information that the committee would want included in that? Summary of decisions, motions, and financial impact.
I'm good with that.
What did we decide on the assessor? Can you give me that number?
I have 169, 433, 63.
I'm concerned that that's still a little bit low. I know we not a number, but
Go back and look at it.
let's just, yeah, if you entertain that idea. If we look at, we just look at other department heads. Where, can you tell me where that puts us on an hourly basis?
It's about 81 maybe.
81.
I mean, if I look at the other department directors, it's just about the top of the,
81.46.
yeah, that was just, yes, it's close to the max for grade 40, 426, which would be 176.27. This, that was just my quick reference to the past. It's just
Close.
yeah, there you go. I was just trying to find a quick. like hourly rate that you mentioned other department heads. That's what my.
Yeah, it's like 81 an hour or something in that range.
Does that make sense for him?
I think it's pretty good.
It was 9%.
I'm good with that.
Okay,
Okay.
yep.
Good deal.
Have to adjourn.
Thank you very much. I know how much work all this is for you and for Nick and for all of you to get us this information. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Further soon. There's no further discussion. This meeting is adjourned.